So for this unit, we're going to be talking about the element of art texture, and we're going to do a couple activities today in our sketchbook just to kind of get our brains thinking about the vocabulary, and then we will jump into our project. So we're going to talk about the definition of texture. So we're on page 1. Texture is the way that something feels or looks like it could feel. So on this page, you need to write the definition, and then you need to color the word texture in a way that describes the word. So what I recommend doing is coloring in each letter so that it looks like a different texture. So here's some examples. This one, I know it's kind of hard to tell, but it's made to look like a brick or block wall, so you could draw like bricks. This one's made to look like a leaf, and so on. So you could draw different things that make it look like it has a texture to it. Okay, so that is page 1. So let's talk about texture. Texture is sometimes easy to see. So if you look at this sculpture, you can see that obviously it has texture because it's pointy, and that was added by the artist. But sometimes artists have a tough job because you have to show that texture is there without it actually being there. So for example, if you were reading a book and you saw this little monster in it, it doesn't actually have a feeling of texture, right? You can't reach out, touch the book, and feel the texture of the monster. But you can tell that it's furry, right? Because of the shapes and the lines that the artist used to create the monster. That's what we call visual or implied texture. So there is real texture, which is texture that we can feel, like sandpaper or cotton balls. We can feel them. But when you just see a texture, it's called visual or implied texture. So for example, this drawing of this girl's hair, you can see the texture in her hair. Or the drawing of these letter C's, you can see that it's oozing and it's like gooey, but you can't actually feel it. So when you're creating implied textures, artists rely on the elements of art big time, right? So this artist, to create this hair, had to rely on value to really create the shiny textured look of her hair. And this artist had to use different types of line to create the illusion that it's actually slimy. So we're actually kind of using other things that we've talked about this semester when we are talking about texture. Here's another example of implied texture. This is artist Chuck Close. He painted this portrait of this man, and you can see how he used value to make different areas of the face look glossy, to make it look more realistic. So we're on page 2 now, and it's going to ask you to create real texture and implied texture. So for your implied texture, we're going to go down to this little monster with the purple eye, and you're going to draw something on him that gives the illusion that he has texture. On this little monster with the green eyes, you're actually going to create a real texture. So I'm going to demonstrate right now how that you might be able to go about that. Okay, so if I'm on page 2 of my sketchbook, you're going to create an implied and a real texture on your monster. So I'm going to start with implied first. And I'm going to just use some colored pencils, and I'm going to create what we call maybe like a fake texture. So I'm just going to like draw it on him. He's kind of looking like solely from Monsters, Inc., right? So we're just creating what looks like a texture. Because remember, that's what implied texture is. It's just how it looks like it would feel. It's not how it actually feels. And if you wanted to be fancy, you could even go in and add some different layers so it looks even better. Okay, so that's kind of just an example. Now, we obviously are not going to really be able to make our sketchbook feel a certain way, but we can use what we call texture plates. And these are texture plates. This is a clear one. This one kind of has like a little bubble texture. And then here's another one, and it kind of has like this little rectangle texture. I have a bunch of these in the classroom that are up on the front round table that you can use. And what you do is you slide them under your paper, and you have to make sure that the texture side is sticking up. And then you rub over it with your colored pencil or crown. Marker won't work, okay? And it creates the texture below. So I'm not doing this very neatly, but you get the idea. And you're going to do that for your other monster. So now that we've talked about texture plates or how to create textures, you're going to create 3 additional texture rubbings using crowns, or you could use colored pencils if you want. Please don't just use a pencil. It's kind of boring. Yes, you do need to fill up the entire square. You're going to create 3 more additional texture rubbings. You can use either the texture plates that I just talked about, or you can find somewhere in the classroom. Crowns, you can use colored pencils if you want. Okay, that's totally fine. And you're going to create 3 different ones. So you need to use 3 different texture plates. Let me remind you that neatness counts. So you're just going to rub on top of it like this. And it creates a texture. Okay, I encourage you to use different colors, please. Okay, reminder, you need to do 3 different ones. I'm just going to do 2 for this video. Here's another one. And it creates a texture. Once again, markers will not work. You're going to have to use colored pencils. Okay, so there's 2, you have to do 3. All right. Then on the last page, you're going to create a lot of different textures. Now, for this page, you must use textures you find around the classroom. So for each letter, you're going to create a different texture. So here's an example that you might want to use. For the T, you could go up to the brick on the wall and rub against the brick on the wall to create a texture. You could use the top of your stool where the screws are to create a texture. Here's what I ask. I ask that you don't go around and use anything on my desk or go around and use anything that is somebody else's property, okay? I want you to just use things that are easily accessible in the classroom. If you have to climb on something to get it, or if you have to take apart something from my bookcase, don't use it, okay? Something that's easy to find and use without actually disrupting the classroom. All right, and then that's kind of our goal for today, is just to get to page 4. But let's go ahead and just talk about the rest of your sketchbook. So next week you will have page 5 due, which is just a coloring page. And then next week you will also have page 6 due, which is to draw feathers, okay? So I misspoke. Page 5 is actually going to be due this week. Page 6 is not due till next week, okay? It's another grid drawing. We'll talk about that more next week, but yes, you do have page 5 due this week. But your goal is to get through page 4 today. And then if you have a little bit of time, go ahead and work on page 5, and we will start our project tomorrow.